Coordination Action Team meeting. Today is June 10th, and this meeting is from 10:30 to 12 p.m. So here's today's agenda. We're going to go through the introduction, the status on current list of greenlit projects. For draft action plans, we're going to go through district-federal collaboration. We're going to go through the Flood Complaint and Drainage Committee interrelationship, stream, rain, and sewer gauge planning, and then we will have our closeout. So just a quick summary of the task force. It was established by the city administrator in September 23rd, 2021, in response to the flooding that occurred in 2020. We report directly to the Deputy Mayor of Operations and Infrastructure, and DC Water and DOEE are the co-chairs of this task force. We had our first kickoff meeting on November 17th, 2021, and all proceedings are open to the public. All task force and action team meetings are available on our website, dcfloodtaskforce.org. So the task force schedule. The full task force, we meet every other month on the third Wednesday of that month. Our next full task force meeting is on Wednesday, July 20th. Action team meetings meet every month. We have a residence resilience on every second Tuesday and our governance and coordination on every second Friday of the month. So we have a full task force final report due in November of 2022. We must have an action plan for each of the 9 categories. We will post the final report of the flood task force to the members. Will be annual and will meet annually to track progress on the action plans and continue to discuss budgeting for the action plans priorities. So we have 2 action teams and 9 categories. For the residents and resilience, we have a flood insurance, repairing flood damage, flood proofing, and sewer and line backups. And for the governance and coordination, we have flood infrastructure, regulations and permitting, mapping and modeling, planning and coordination, and emergency response. So next, I will pass this on to Nick.
Yep, yes. I can take him here. Thanks, Rachel.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, so this section of the agenda, we want to give an opportunity for us, the agencies that are working on action plans now, to give a status update and also kind of answer any questions. If you go to the next slide, just as a reminder, this is we're trying to produce these kind of like 3 to 5 page documents for each action. And if you go to the next slide, we sent out, just after the last task force meeting, we sent out kind of like what we expected to see in the July 20th meeting. And so that's what you're seeing here. So we're expecting in the July 20th meeting to have these action plans from the governance and coordination group. There'll be a couple other action plans from residential resilience that we'll also present at the July 20th meeting. Hopefully this is not a surprise to any of the agencies listed on here, because you've gotten the email shortly after the May meeting. And so yeah, our plan for this next little bit is to just give each agency a chance to update the group on how it's going, what they're thinking about, if they have any questions that will be useful to discuss in this forum, as we're kind of just giving you guys an open forum to talk about these action plans. Because again, just as a reminder, the 4 that you see on the screen here, we're expecting them to be presented at the July 20th meeting in front of the full task force in a similar fashion to what we did at the May meeting for the first 6 action plans. So you go to the next slide. Yeah, so the one action plan we're expecting to present on potentially is the list of annual list of capital projects. And Alan, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say about this or questions you wanted to ask.
No, nothing right now. We're still pulling the list together, and a thank you to EJ from DDOT for sending over a bunch of new projects this past week.
Awesome. Do you want to, do you feel comfortable enough sharing kind of like the broad direction of what you think this might look like?
Yeah, I can give my sense for it now. So yeah, basically what we are going to try to do is pull together this broad list of flood mitigation infrastructure projects, along with their rough cost at a very high level and kind of large buckets of cost. So is it 1 to 5 million? Is it 5 to 10? Um, and then what year we would anticipate the cost beginning. So basically a measure of how far along in this project are we right now. Is it a very nascent stage? Is it, through design, et cetera, et cetera? Is it kind of part of the pipeline, or is it something that we would need a lot of additional funding to get into the pipeline? Um, and then that will allow us both to have a list of projects that we're tracking and making sure that we are following, in terms of instituting flood resilience, as well as it will hopefully demonstrate to us the gap between the funding that we have assigned right now towards flood projects and the funding that we're going to need in order to get ourselves to what we consider to be a flood resilient city. And so the natural next step for that would be to say, okay, well, this is the funding we need. Where are we going to be able to go to find that funding and make some recommendations on how to get that additional funding? Federal funding is going to be a big part of that. It also won't solve everything. So what are the local ways that we're going to be able to find that funding? Um, is there anything else, Nick, that you were hoping to for me to share on this section?
I can add in another factor in this is how to prioritize different projects. So I think we're still looking, and there's definitely more discussion to be had on, how projects move up in the pipeline, perhaps, is it because there's different factors here. There can be number of residents we're trying to protect from flooding. There could be prioritization for low-income, vulnerable residents. There can be prioritization for a number of buildings, area that's protected, types of properties protected. So there's just all kinds of different ways we can try to determine priorities. So those are just a few of the factors, and that's still definitely open for discussion, to be discussed, to be determined, as we move forward with this list.
Yes, great point. I thank you for mentioning that. That's a really key part of it.
And maybe one thing to add is, I don't know that we're going to, I think it kind of depends on how we want to use the action team meetings going forward. I don't know that we're going to, within this action plan, try and set the prioritization criteria. I think maybe give like an indication and some guidance on how we want to do it, but also potentially just saying we are going to prioritize in this general fashion, and that'll be done at a later date. So I don't think we've quite figured out if we're going to execute that prioritization in this one or not, but just leaving it open. And I think we can kind of view these action plans similarly. Like, we don't always have to implement or get everything all done by the November deadline. We can kind of lay out a roadmap of what we need to do. As long as that's pretty clear and tangible, then I think the task force will be okay with that. All right, thanks, Alan. So we can go to the next slide. So this one is kind of jointly between DCRA and DOEE, well, this category in general, but the specific action plan is updating the construction codes to adopt the 2021. And so this is already in process, but I don't know if we have anyone on from DCRA today to talk about this.
I don't see Chris Bailey on today.
Okay. Well, we will have to catch up with Chris. I think this, for this particular action plan, it might just be laying out the timeline that is probably public somewhere on the construction codes adoption and what that looks like. But I do know there is a long process for every time we want to update the construction codes, and we're somewhere in the middle of it. So I think this will be just kind of outlining how we finish that. All right, so we can go to the next one. All right, so this is back to Alan, and we can also add a little bit in here too from the DOE side. But so this particular action is using the DC Silver Jackets and that forum, and specifically updating the MOU where district agencies agree to participate. So Alan, any updates on that one?
No, this one I think is pretty self-explanatory and honestly just a matter of bringing our participation in the Silver Jackets, like catching it up to functionally where it is now in terms of who is involved in the flood work, and who should be participating in these conversations. So this one is very much underway.
Yeah, and maybe just add some context. I think the initial MOU was signed in 2014 or 2016. And I think since then there's been some additional agencies that didn't sign the first one that we've since realized have an important role in flood risk reduction in the city. So I think getting those agencies and then also potentially adding some specifics on what the request is of these agencies that are participating into the MOU. I think that will be part of this. But for everyone on the call, assuming that your agency is going to be a signatory, it will require getting through your staffing and routing process for you to sign. So just a heads up that when we do get around to implementing this, that it will require some action, but hopefully not too difficult on individual agency parts. All right, and then so moving on to the last one we can update on. So this is in category 9. So HCM is the lead on this category and also has a role in the specific action, which is installing flashing warning signs at frequently flooded locations. I know Bermesia and her team have been working closely with DDOT folks. I don't know if either of you have an update or want to talk about this, ask questions.
Yeah. Hi there, everyone. Good morning. So we definitely have the action plan pretty in a good position to present next July at the next meeting. I think we've shared in various conversations that through our engagement with this the task force, but then also some of the stakeholder meetings where we've shared progress on this project, there's been great interest in which we've been in conversations with WMATA since I think in the listing of potential locations that DDOT has shared, there were a few areas that WMATA was interested in knowing more about. So we're kind of doing some of that conversation. I know that DC Water had interest as well in some of the sites that have been identified by DDOT. And so we just kind of want to make sure that with this action plan, it represents not just some of the flood prone intersections that DDOT has shared, but then other information. And so we just kind of doing our best to make sure it has a really comprehensive view. So I didn't know if anyone had any follow-ups because there has been some conversations outside of these meetings with this project. And so I'm interested to hear if anyone has any questions related to the project that we're assisting DDOT with coordinating.
Ramesia, we'll touch on this again. On
Yes.
the next section when we cover it.
Okay, no problem.
And maybe I'll just highlight here, I think, so for Misia and the DDOT team are, they'll put together this action plan, and within it, I think we're actually listing specific intersections. Is that right?
Yes, we are. We have about, I think with upwards to 20 intersections.
Okay.
And so, but we also have notes from stakeholders on those intersections, some of the points that have been brought in at this task force, but then also at Silver Jacket through, and then also other conversations related to those locations, just to figure out the prioritization.
Yeah.
Because essentially we're doing this action plan, but there is an opportunity to assist with installing a pilot of a few warning signs at certain locations. So just understanding the listing of what is a high priority. So that's kind of where we're going through that, but that doesn't impact the action plan per se, but that's just some of the work that we're doing in this month.
Awesome. Yeah, and I brought that up to say, when you guys present in July, and then there will be there's that comment period. I think that's a chance for everybody to scan this list and make sure we've identified all of the flood-prone intersections. I think we have a pretty good. We've done a lot of research and tried to pull from a lot of sources, but you never know. And so yeah, that'd be a good chance for folks on the phone or to make sure you're working with your staff to say like, yep, this is all the ones that we can think of, and that would be good feedback to have. All right. Well, we'll move right along. So
Hey, Nick.
yeah, go ahead.
I see that Chris Bailey is now on.
Ah,
If we wanted to put Chris on the spot with the previous
yeah,
question.
let's put Chris on the spot.
Sure,
so
I apologize for being late, but
that's all right. As long as you're okay with you being on the spot. So Rachel, can you go back to slide 10, the category 6? So Chris, we're just trying to give everyone like a mini update on the action plans. There was like 4 action plans that we're expecting to be presented in July, and one of them is the one you see here, 6.2, the construction codes. And we don't expect you to make a presentation right now today, but I wonder if you have any just broad thoughts on what you plan to include in this action plan. And if you have any questions or feedback that you need from task force members, now would be a good time to ask, and you can follow up later. So,
Okay,
I'll turn it to you.
not to get into too much because I'm coming into this cold, but where we are working with the task force as well as with the I-codes are implementation of hardline items for regulatory oversight and trying to get some notice actually out there from DCRA based upon some of the zones and areas that are affected by the flood hazard area, both zones and the permits that are coming in to do that. So we have an appendix G, which is our floodplain regulations that we have that we're modifying. We go through this exercise, regularly when we hit a new code cycle, which we are in one right now. And in doing so, we're trying to create, not in terms of future proof, but more so get a better understanding of what common sense regulations that we can implement now that will benefit both homeowners, businesses, the code, regulatory agencies, and them so that they can have written down guidance on how to handle some of these particular cases, especially with some of the intricacies of code with new buildings, existing buildings, renovation of those, so that it's very clear how to move from one to the other and so forth. Because right now the floodplain regs are kind of you shall do this under this condition. Well, that's great, but if we don't know to go there or if there's no triggers, we tend to overlook those or have to find out about those through some other means, meaning inspections or oversight, help with DOEE or other sister agency partners. So I hope that kind of gives us a high-level overview of what we're working with our iCodes now. There will be another comment period for the public starting in August. And I don't have the official dates for that, but it should be August or September, where we have a public comment period where if there are anything that the task force comes on that we would like to integrate, we can actually propose those at that time.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah.
Hopefully I covered it.
Yeah, I know. I mentioned to the group that I think this particular action, like a lot of work is already being done. So I think when you create the actual plan, I think probably one of the more important things is going to be that timeline of what it's going to take to finish this. And this one, I don't think, like it's already in process, but it would be good for folks to know where.
Well, I can speak on that because there is an expectation to finish which is the 2021. We're past that though. This is the 2021 code, but with the DCMR, which is the district municipal regulations, coming into effect, we heavily modify the national standard, and that takes some time. So if our open period in August happens and we incorporate those changes, the board will then vote on those, and we present those to the mayor's office and to council. Once the mayor's office and legal sufficiency goes through, it gets approved, it will go to council for adoption, and then we will adopt that hopefully this upcoming spring in 2023. We will have these regulations in place. That is the time frame that we could hope for. It may happen sooner, but in past code cycles, that's usually how long it takes.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Also, I don't think I've ever seen a DCRA polo shirt. That looks nice. I like it.
Oh, yeah, I actually made this myself. I appreciate it. No. Eric, yeah, we do have a little bit of merch from DCRA, just a little
good. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to compete with the HCMA swag, but I like that one. All right, so Rachel, you can go to the how to approve. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we talked about this one at the last task force meeting, but there is an update. So, if we just look at the top, May 18th, we presented action plans. It was actually 1 through 6, but the main point is still there. And then on July 20th, we will vote on those first grouping of action plans. Now, originally, we had suggested that after May 18th, that we would release the action plans both to agencies, which we have already done, and to the general public. But we've had a change of heart. We think it probably makes more sense to give agencies a chance to look at these plans, which in some cases include like a budgetary requirement or actions on behalf of other agencies. So we wanted to make sure agencies were good with it before we released it to the public. So what that means is, so for example, those first 6 that we presented on May 18th, we'll present them. We won't present them on July 20th. We will bring them up for a vote. And then if they are approved, we will then release those plans for a 1-month public comment period. And then in September, the September task force meeting, if we have to make updates based on public comments, or if not, if we have to make updates on public comments, we'll present those updates, and the task force can formally approve them then. So we're going to work on a slightly different graphic to kind of explain that a little bit better, but essentially we're adding a month to kind of the final approval of all these action plans to include a 1-month comment period for agencies, and then after approval, another 1-month comment period for the public. And what that means is we may have to have a meeting in January of 2023 to finalize the very last round, because just because the math of adding in that public comment period. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if there's any questions on that. So maybe to put it another way, after July 20th, if we get approval of the first 6 action plans from the task force, then they will be released to the public. It will be posted on our website. We'll send around a link to, or we'll send around attachments of each action plan to anyone who registered for the public outreach sessions. We'll send it into, there's a couple of community groups that we know of that have been interested in this. So, we will get the word out that these action plans are available for comment. And so just giving everybody a heads up that these will be viewable and potentially editable by the public, and then we'll have to work together with whatever lead agency for each action plan to address any comments.
Nicholas, can I just based off of what I just gave in terms of timeline for the integration of the I codes, would there be any benefit to pointing out in some of these action items which ones would be directly affecting the building codes or the I codes?
I'm not sure I understand you're saying within the action plan that you are producing?
Mm-hmm. Is there a need to kind of provide a summary of affected I code changes so that we could keep those together and present those prior? Because I don't want to have a window of opportunity. We lose that in the fall of this year by then postponing that, because once we get past the public comment period for the I codes,
right,
we won't be able to make a modification unless it gets presented at the board level
right,
prior to approval.
Right. I think I see what you're saying, which is that in some of these cases, they already have their own public comment process. And so it's a little bit strange, I think, to make it look like through the task force there's an additional. So I think with the I-codes action plan, yeah, that's a little, I have to think about that. I think we'll have to think about as a group how we how that gets presented to the public. Because I mean, you're right, like if they want to comment, they should be commenting on the official code comment process that you guys are running.
Well, not necessarily on the official, but the proposal can move forward. If there are major changes, that does affect. But
Right.
if the proposal is agreed upon, we can move that forward.
Yeah.
Long as the language or the meat of it doesn't change, and we're just talking maybe some legalese or some grammatical issues based upon your public comment of the task force, we can approve with conditions in the I-code version of it. But if we set the public comment after, we run into the risk of not having a proposal to present because it's not been fleshed out, and then we missed that opportunity.
So what I'm hearing is things that may need to, changes that we are identifying through the task force that may need to go into that I-code update. And what comes to mind is the backwater valve requirements discussions we've been having with on the residential side of things. I think we've also identified some other coordination about inspections, things like that. So is that what you're saying? Things like that we need to identify earlier so they can get into the update?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's very difficult to, after something's been approved, to modify it. I don't want to speak for the board, but as a member of the Construction Code Coordination Board, modifying a proposal will have to be re-reviewed, and that takes time. So it takes relatively months, which delays our presenting it to the mayor's office for legal sufficiency and then approval by council. So the proposal needs to be as close to the final document so that we can vote on it and then move forward. And like I said, we can do comments and say, you know, any type of grammar or small legalese that needs to be changed, but the premise is the same. And we need that presented. And right now you have it as July, which is great, but 8 through 15 is in September, and that's after our comment period. So the 8 through 15 are what I'm concerned with, as well as the previous action items. If there are anything in there, that may be too late to integrate those. So there may have to be a hierarchy.
I think we'll be okay, because I think we've
Okay.
already identified the things that may need to go into those iCode updates, but I think it's worth after this meeting to really go through everything and make sure that those things have been identified.
Hey,
And
Chris, this is
just be
Julia.
mindful of that window while we're presenting these, that's all.
Don't the upgrades have a separate public comment anyway?
They do, but those separate comments have to be voted on after. So if they're not uploaded into that comment period, the board
Right.
won't see them unless they are brought forward by a board member.
Right. And what I'm getting at is some of these may have already been in the works in support of the
That's a good
backwater
point.
law program, and my recommendation would be to just move forward, make sure you get it in this cycle. Because I think there's more damage to be done by postponing it.
Yeah.
And do we need an action by the principals to support that, Meredith and Nick? I think we should move forward.
Yeah, I think there's just going to be a narrow number of options that need to go into the building codes.
Right.
There's so many other things don't have any relation to the building codes. So I think
Yeah,
we'll just
some of
focus
this is
on-
process and policy and,
Yeah.
and, you know, notification to applicants and constituents and stuff like that. That can be done on the DCRA, DOEE, DC water, you know, level. Okay. I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that the board
That's very good to
handles
point
that.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think there might be a few other action plans that have like similar comment period. So anyways, thank you, Chris.
No problem.
We'll think about that one. All right, so I think we can shift now. So we're shifting now from prepping for the July 20th meeting and what action plans we're going to present there, and now we're going to shift to kind of spending some more. This is more of the brainstorming updates on a few other actions that won't be action plans that presented at July 20th, but maybe for the September meeting. So the first one, there's an action that we kind of tentatively identified as is there a way we can improve district and federal collaboration? And so we've been talking a little bit with Julia Coster at NCPC about how that might work. And so if you go to the next slide, we have a couple ideas that we just wanted to present to the group. And I can join in with Julia to talk a little bit about the opportunities, but I figured I'd give Julia the floor a little bit to explain what is going on at the federal level with executive orders and how federal agencies are kind of thinking about that and handling it now. So Julia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Nick. I think there are several different ways that we can look at federal collaboration. Right now, all of the large federal agencies, I mean, the smaller federal agencies, are responding to a executive order that came out, right at the start of the Biden administration. And that's 14030. It reinstated an executive order that had come out during the Obama administration and then been rescinded. It's a long story. But the key issue is that it asks federal agencies to establish tougher federal risk management standards for federally funded new construction or substantial renovation. And so currently, federal agencies have longstanding guidance that uses the 100-year floodplain standard for this purpose, and this new guidance gives federal agencies 3 different approaches using the 500-year floodplain, using +2 or +3 above what's called freeboard value, or using a climate-informed science approach. And so right now, federal agencies are working to develop guidance that fits their mission and their operations. So you will see that different agencies may use a different approach. But I think the bottom line is that they will all be looking at higher floodplain standards. The executive order also encourages resilient and nature-based approaches. And I'll just note that for NCPC, we generally are anticipating, we review all these different federal agency projects here in the district and in the National Capital Region, but that we would use the flood standard by the federal applicant agency. So once, for example, GSA or the Park Service, that would be Interior, or the Department of Defense has adopted their guidance to respond to this new executive order, that is what we would then use during our review process. That's our game plan, but we have yet to fully move this forward as well. In discussions with Nick and Meredith, I think that there are a number of opportunities. Certainly, things like the +2, +3 freeboard value and the climate-informed science approach need good data and good models. Some of those are being developed at a high level federally, but the district with your integrated flood model, I think will have great information and great data that could help federal agencies in responding to this. And as we move forward, what we are, through all of our longstanding work, what we're keenly aware of is that we have so many federal facilities here, and they're next to each other. So to the extent that we can work with the district and the other federal agencies to coordinate standards, perhaps in geographic areas, will ensure that we're providing consistent levels of flood protection. And we hope that we'll continue to inform our commissions and other federal agencies about this particular district effort with your flood plan here. So Nick, was that what you primarily wanted me to cover?
Yeah, no, that's great. I just wanted to give everyone a sense of how we were going to approach this action plan, and yeah, I think
yeah, and I think I don't remember where it ended up here, but we do already for our project reviews, we do include a number of different district agencies on what's called our coordinating committee. So that's a very kind of hands-on way to enable district agencies like DOEE to look at proposed master plans and projects as they come through our review cycle and offer offer comments on stormwater, flooding, and related issues. So,
Yeah, no, that's been it's a little bit in the weeds about how permitting gets done, but it's been actually a hugely helpful way to make sure we're on the same page. So,
yep.
yeah. And SHPO is on there too, right? Historic Preservation
Yeah.
Office.
Right. So it's often a kind of a place where we have good discussions about competing policies and guidance, as well as, you know, where we're trying to figure out how they're going to meet different standards effectively.
Nick, I got a question on this one.
Sure.
This is excellent work, and the collaboration is fantastic. What can be done so that the key elements of this are sustainable? What happened to 13690 could happen to the next executive order also.
Yeah, we're keenly aware that this has the opportunity to be a bit of a
Unfortunately, yes, Julia.
a ping pong ball. I think, however, our hope is that most of our applicant agencies, I would say, are, to meet their own mission objectives, are already looking pretty seriously at resilience and flood proofing. So, you know, we will, as a federal agency, will follow the guidance established by either legislation or executive order. But I think we do in our policies encourage resilient and sustainable approaches that consider changing conditions. So that's about the best I can give you at the moment.
No, I understand. I understand the restrictions under which you have to operate.
Yeah.
I was particularly looking at the nature-based approaches because if you look at the science and the understanding that people have of flooding, especially in urban areas now, it's not about building more concrete structures and holding ponds. It's definitely about blue-green infrastructure and blending with nature to arrest the flow and control it. And part of the integrated flood modeling that DOE is doing is going to come up with options to implement these things.
Yes. I would say we certainly see those opportunities. We are also keenly aware that we are in fact, I wouldn't say a built out, but a very urban environment, at least here in Washington, DC, and that we have cultural and historic landscapes, settings, and facilities. So our ability to think, we really will need to think collaboratively and creatively about how to incorporate the right kinds of approaches. And I think I'll just reflect that some of the work we've done with various federal and district agencies, for example, in the Federal Triangle, have pointed out that it can be challenging to address the volume of our significant interior flood events without some combination of both gray and green infrastructure. So I appreciate your thoughts, and I know we're very excited, for example, to be participating in the work that Andrea is doing to bring some examples of green infrastructure into, I think it's Southwest. So it's a good comment, and I think we're, as well as the Anacostia River restoration planning, where that involves looking at a lot of federally controlled sites.
Awesome.
But never a dull moment. here. in
No,
federal.
no.
No.
And if you think the back and forth on the flooding executive order is bad, you should take a look at the wetland rules from the EPA. That's a whole other fun time. All right.
It's a good time for me to turn off. my camera. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Julia. All right, so I think we can move on, and then I'll pass it to, I think this might be Meredith or Salil. I can't remember, but we're gonna talk about drainage.
Well, let's see the next slide and then we can see who picks it up. How about that?
Yeah.
Cool. I'll start with this one.
Okay.
So this is a attempt, more than an attempt, is to look at how communication occurs when somebody calls in on flooding issues. So there's a direct call, which is the conventional way, which is the stick figure on the right. And then you have people, I don't want to say younger, but more progressive people who definitely use the cell phones and electronic means as opposed to just wanting to speak to somebody. And they could go to a DC Water website. We have a report a problem website where they could just enter in the information there at present. We have several coming in on the social media with comments entered on social media that then come to us. And you always have the conventional way of calling the DC Water Command Center, calling 311, and there are always the people that would call the local council's office or mayor's office or other DC agencies to report issues. So there's various ways that flooding or excess water, Meredith, thank you for that clarification on the definition, gets reported.
Yeah, and just to,
thank you,
to
Stephen.
set a little more of the stage here, you know, when the public sees water where they think it shouldn't be, to them it's a flooding problem. And you know, whether it falls in our definition of formal flooding or not, it's flooding to the public. And so it could be in many different places, could be on a street, could be on a public property, could be in their basement, could be coming from a neighbor's property. So, but it's all called flooding. So DC has a drainage committee that's been dealing with these problems for decades. And what we're looking at here is improving that process. Yeah, so that's what these flooding complaints are about.
Thank you, Meredith. And I just saw Stephen on the chat said OPC gets called also. So that would go into the council, mayor's office, OPC, and other DC agencies. Group. You go to the next slide as to what happens when the call comes in. So this is the present workflow. For the call to actually get acted on, it has to come through the command center at DC Water. So whether it's a call to us or call to OUC, 311, which is a 311 call, it would go into a report a problem, then that comes to DC Water Command Center. If it's a social media call, our external affairs folks, OMAC, picks it up, they report it to the command center. If it goes into report a problem website directly by the resident, still comes to the command center. All the calls come into our command center. They get logged as an incident. And the incident then results in an investigation work order. Now, the reason it comes to the command center is we may have 5, 10, 20 calls, which are incidents on the same problem. Just so that we can respond to it quickly and we don't dilute the resources. It's important to an individual that's trained to look at these calls and then relate them that if it's the same issue or if they're different issues. Okay. So it goes to the investigation work order. The crew goes out to investigate. If it's a resident calling in, that's typically where the crew would meet up with the residents and discuss the issue. Majority of the time, it's a quick resolution. The data gets involved in the work order. The data comes back to the command center. If it's not clearly a DC water issue after investigation, at present, DC water notifies the caller to call another DC agency. There's nothing DC water can do to help them. Part of the discussion in this task force is to have a one-call solution so that once a resident identifies a problem, we try and take it through resolution within the different agencies as a team. So the change, it goes on to the next slide. So if you could go one next slide, please. Thank you. And there's some minor change. If you look at the left-hand side and you see a little red arrow going back up to the OUC. Now that came out of the September 10th, 2020 flooding, where we weren't expecting the rainfall. Nobody was. We had a deluge of calls that overwhelmed the people monitoring the command center, and the hold times were long. Want to avoid that. We're working with OUC right now, developing an MOA so that overflow calls beyond what the command center can handle will automatically get diverted to 311 in an emergency, which then come back to us to report a problem. The other change here is to create a agreement on what kind of issues get addressed by the different agencies, so that, and how do we communicate with them? Email or a different electronic method, so that rather than calling back and telling the resident that this issue is not DC Water's issue, we would take the details of the investigation and either forward to DDOT, DCRA, or DE for additional investigation or resolution. Next slide. Assessment, that's the right word. Thank you. These are some of the examples for discussion with different agencies. This is not carved in stone. It is a discussion point. But right now, if it's a sewer backup inside the house, it's very clearly DC Waters. If it's groundwater intrusion into the basement, there is nothing DC Water can do to alleviate it and help it. Right now it's DOE, not that they can do anything, but that's an assessment issue. If it's an issue outside the property, we get a lot of calls and rainfalls from outside the property. There's flow entering into the property from the street. Unless it's a clogged catch basin, which we would go and investigate, if it's just grading that results in flow entering their property from the street, there's nothing DC Water can do to assist them with that. So is that something a DDOT would be able to assist them? There's flow entering their property from the neighbor's yard. Maybe the neighbor changed the grading in the yard, so now the flow is entering a different property. Complaints about a buried stream now surfacing because there's a lot of water. So the question is, these are issues that need assessment, loop closure with the resident, but it's not a DC Water issue that we can work with. And rather than just telling them to call somebody else, let's try and find a way to direct their question to the right agency so they can respond to it. Clogged catch basin in the street is clearly a DC Water issue. If it's a flooded street, there are no catch basins on the street, there's not much DC Water can do. Is that a DDOT issue then? Underpass flooding, if there's no stormwater pump station out there, whose issue is that? And Vermicia just talked about a warning system. We'll go into that in a bit. That was a great idea. If a sewer is overflowing because it's surcharged, that's definitely a DC Water issue. So these are some of the ideas or some of the complaints they've had in the past. And rather than just dropping the ball and directing the customer somewhere else, want to try and assign it to a different agency for further assessment. I'm going to stop here. Meredith, do you want to add anything before we get comments?
I'll just say that this is a pretty good list of the typical problems that come in. There are other things, and this is a first a first run through, based on current responsibilities of which agency is the right one to assess the problem. In some cases, that's the same agency to fix the problem, but some of these are more complicated, and I'll touch on that on the next slide. But yeah, we can open it up for comments and questions on this slide.
I just have a general question, that if we're talking about a flood condition, what responsibility would the agencies have to correct the flood condition? Maybe the aftermath, like the resulting, like the repair or to bring it back to a livable or habitable space. I could see that, but the correction of the flood event itself, I don't see how we are as
So I
agencies.
think this really is addressing more routine or just, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe
This is not an
non-emergency.
emergency flood event.
Yeah, we do have, we have identified the emergency response
Mhm.
separately, and HCMA has processes for that, and we've got the cleanup from flooding conditions also being worked through our residential.
Okay, thanks for the clarity on that. I just
Yeah,
wanted to make
there's
sure.
a lot of overlapping issues here.
So Chris, that was a great question. September 10th, again, that was a big rainfall, but there were a lot of complaints that came in about backyards flooding and then that water going into the basement. And they wanted a resolution on the flooding in the backyard because the flow was coming from either the neighbor's yard or it was coming from the street. And yes, if you really stand back and look at it, it's you say, where was the developer in developing this property or looking at the grading around it? But at this point, it's from a resident's perspective, it's a real problem. The question is, how do we help them solve it? Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So no, sorry, Salil. You were breaking up on my end. It may be me, but I didn't. It was very choppy, so I was unable to hear the question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll try speaking into the microphone directly this time. Does that help? Chris, you've gone.
No, I went off camera. Maybe it's my connection.
I'm hearing you okay, Salil.
Yeah, it's probably me.
We should certainly continue this discussion, and I think it needs to be a discussion not only with DCRA but DDOT, DOE. We all need to approach this as a team.
So if I gather, and we certainly can talk offline on this, if I gather, this is an event of flooding caused by a particular discharge of water that's created on site or off site, not necessarily in response to an emergency, or a heavy rain, act of God type of event. Typically, whenever we do have an issue with flooding on a property that discharges to another, DCRA, of course, is the appropriate agency for that, because we can cite them for potential stormwater or property maintenance issues because of the equipment or the plumbing of that site. But if it's an act of God or a rain event or something that's discharged that normally would not occur, the parameters for correction or support is very very gray on our area. But I definitely can go into larger detail with our property maintenance codes, our building codes that address that type of event caused by the building or construction or grading.
You bring up an excellent point, Chris. And I think it'd be great for us to come up with how do we approach this with a homeowner who's flooded. there may be nothing that we could do. Like if there's a buried stream in the backyard, for example, and a developer built a house on top of it, and it's now surfacing for a range of reasons. But it's a real problem for the homeowner. May not be anything we can do, but we should be able to explain to them what's happening so they understand it. It's not an easy discussion. And I'm
No,
sure
it's
Stephen,
not.
no. I'm sure Stephen gets a lot of calls on that also.
Yeah, so I just want to add, hi guys, it's Stephen Dudek from the OPC, is just managing the consumer's expectations. And so I think what we need to be clear of whenever a DC Water DOEE, DDOT, DCRA goes out, what is the fruitfulness of the investigation? So if we identify it's a sewer backup, it really doesn't identify as maybe a DC Water caused that sewer backup. It may be like an act of God, like the September 10th flooding. And I think the concern and the frustration of the consumers is who's going to help? What agencies are there to help? And so I think with this typical flood complaint assignment and assessment is we really need to answer that question, because that's going to be the first question for the consumer. Great, you came out, investigated, you identified the problem, but now I have $10, $15, $20,000 of property damage. And granted, all the other action plans would address that, but we may come across consumers who aren't aware of that. So I think that's something we just need to address is, yes, we can have those difficult conversations with the property owners, but we need to be upfront with them, saying we may not be responsible. We can only investigate to identify the source, but you still may be on the hook for all of your property damage. Because I think that was a lot of the frustration with the September 10th flooding with the consumers we worked with was they felt great and gratitude with DC Water taking the initiative and giving the $5,000, which DC Water didn't have to. But in the sense they felt what other remedies are out there to protect my property? And I think the flood task force will address those. But I apologize for my 3-month-old trying to chime in as well.
Stephen, this was very helpful.
No, thank you.
But just need to, I think we need to just identify when we go out, what is the message to the consumer? So we're managing their expectations and not giving them that false hope.
And it's all coming back to, just like you said, Stephen, managing expectations. A lot of the sewer backups, I know the first thing they want is a resolution and next somebody to help them. I understand that, and it's completely understandable. But find its grease and material being flushed down by somebody else that creates a blockage. We can relieve it. Blockage gets created by a third party, maybe not the homeowner that was impacted. So it's an expectation management issue.
Yeah, I think that's a great transition to the next slide. Stephen, you did a good introduction to some of the things we've identified as needs.
Rachel?
Yeah, next slide. So going back to where do we pick up from there? What does the drainage committee need to operate better? What Salil just went over, a standard process for investigating and referring complaints, just making sure that those get looked at, get to the right agency. We've got that in progress. There are a lot of problems that the agencies and the people working within the committee can solve. Some of them are simple, but there's a lot that are not easy to solve. So as we work further with this, we need to figure out what are those pathways to raise these difficult problems, develop solutions, getting senior management to recognize these, support these problems, determine where agencies can do the work and where they can't do the work. Make sure those that responsibilities between agencies are clearly defined, and where there is no solution, at least on the government's side of thing. And the items that Salil mentioned for groundwater entering a residence or a buried stream that may have been piped by a developer when a property was built is most likely the responsibility of the property owner. So, you know we need to be able to be more clear with property owners what resources are available to them when a problem is the property owners to solve, when the government can help, when the government cannot help, and just, try to make things as clear as possible. We're also looking at how to track all these different cases and make sure data gets shared, because problems resurface, often every few years. If there's a problem that doesn't get solved, it keeps coming back. So it's good to know when we have those things. And as Josh from DOE mentioned in the chat, we need to report these items to FEMA on a quarterly basis. So we're probably not getting all the data together yet to report. So we really want to have that to report. And these problems are going to require funding to solve. Some of them are big problems, which have developed into big projects. The Bloomingdale flooding in 2012 developed into the First Street Tunnel. So the city has done a lot of work to solve some of the major problems, but there's more to solve.
Thank you, Meredith. And this also ties in to another initiative we have going on, which is, while it doesn't directly solve the current ongoing problem, we talk about disclosures so that an existing problem does not get transferred to a new owner without them knowing about it. And there were several complaints about, I just bought this house, I didn't know it had a water problem, for example. There's not much we can do. I feel really sorry for them, but that should have been covered in a disclosure. So that's something else that's been identified as a need. Josh, I'm going to go back to your question that Meredith also touched on. We're working with Pharmacia and OUC on data sharing on calls on the flooding. I think that'll help. The issue right now is developing an MOA and what information can be shared publicly by DC Water. So we're working through that on the legal end. But yes, that should be in place as part of this task force effort.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's been on my mind for quite a while.
And Opera, I'm going to hit to your question in a second.
Hi, hello?
Josh, I see your camera come on. Did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, can you hear me?
It's really hard to hear you, Josh.
Hi, how about now?
Good.
Any better?
Yes.
So I'm glad that you brought that up with the data sharing, because we've been doing a lot of work on, just as I have two practical examples, I guess. So if more and more flood events happen, and say a particular ward or neighborhood were to, if one of our agencies needed to report, like, from, say, the mayor or agency head was like, hey, look, I want to know about all the complaints in this area, and, we want to present on that. Like for DOE, we certainly have ours, and we can request from HCMA some information, but you kind of, right now, yeah, he's kind of like puzzled of like, am I really providing all that appropriately? And, I mentioned with FEMA, they want all those responses as well. And that's been a struggle. And then also with our flood risk viewer, we've done a tremendous amount of work on visualization of various, complaints or concerns from the public. And so, for instance, we were talking about the September flooding. With that, we were able to take, HCMA had the response from the Jayhawk, and we were able to load those in to our flood risk viewer, and we're able to take a look and say, okay, through like a heat map, here's where all the responses were, here's where the actual floodplain is. But I'd love to be able to do that with everybody's, like, how do we get to the point where you can have a GIS map and you can have everybody's, responses to a flood event, and you can put it on there and we can be able to look at it. And I think even besides maybe 311, having a kind of uneditable internal document for the different agencies, like uploading their various responses and locations to that with different tabs, like something that simple. I mean, I know it's difficult with communicating between the agencies with the MOUs, but even having something like that would be really helpful so that we're not missing anything. So I think that's going to be this is a fantastic topic, and I think it's going to be really great moving forward. And you're right with the resources. Maybe our office responding to a floodplain inquiry, maybe our office has expertise that others don't, and vice versa. And so that's always in the back of my mind of like, okay, are we doing the best we can to help the residents at this current moment? And so I think this is a very, very important discussion to continue to have. So I'm just really glad it's been brought up.
I agree, Josh. And I don't believe just because the task force sunsets this October, this issue just goes away. I think the teaming effort continues all the way through.
Hey, we have another great presentation, left in the meeting. So in the interest of time, I'm going to suggest we move to the next topic, unless we've got any other burning comments.
Let's move to the next slide. Super. Now, what you're seeing here is we being DC Water contracted with Vukes out of Canada, who has some special expertise in this area to help us identify what areas of the city are anticipated to get rainfall, different amounts of rainfall, so that we can pay special attention to the storm pump stations and our other infrastructure in that area. And it's color coded. It's a 2 square mile square grid here. And again, this is data in advance of the storm. So the accuracy is only as good as the information coming in from the different weather services and the different rain gauges around the area. And the plan is to have the same information available to district agencies that need to respond also. And again, it involves an MOA and all the good stuff, but those are things we can get through.
Just so I'm clear, this is strictly rainfall. This is not the modeling effort.
That is correct. This is anticipated rainfall.
Okay.
So for a single specific event, is that right?
Right. So we use this anytime there's a rain event, is we run this, and this gets updated periodically, and we share it with our operating groups so they can be ready for it. There's no reason why this can't be shared with the rest of the district.
But I'm assuming that the modeling effort would also have to model rainfall, expected rainfall, right? I mean, you would have to cover this same ground, right?
Yeah, I think there's so the integrated flood model, one of the inputs has to be how much rain is falling and how much time. And so basically what you're seeing here, this could be used as an input to the integrated flood model.
Okay.
In which you would say, okay, like here's how much rain is falling, and you'd also give, is this over 24 hours? Is this over 6 hours? You'd set that variable. You'd let the model run, and then it would show you another map, which is where is it flooding.
Yeah. So if you have this and you also know what the sewer system capacity is in different areas, like the one that flooded in 2020, for example, then you would know the vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Josh, there is, I just cut and pasted. That's why there's no title on here right now. It's just an explanation that's moving into the next slide. So just let me geek a little bit on the model a little bit. It is going to be extremely hard to take predicted rainfall data and connect it to a model to show where the flooding is going to occur, because unless you simplify the model, the processing power doesn't exist right now for the city. It's great to run it on a historical information to calibrate it, but on a real-time basis, you have to significantly simplify the model to be able to run it. Sometime next several years, the processing powers might increase, but right now I don't believe there's one existing.
Yeah, maybe I just add real,
By the
add-
agency.
yeah, just add real quick on that. So to Sal's point, I think I could see the wheel spinning, which is like, if we have a forecast, can we then produce a map? And the answer is, we couldn't produce a map very quickly. We could, the way like what Salil's saying, it requires like a lot of servers, and it could take like hours or days. So instead, what we might do is we might, we might have similar storms that have occurred in the past, run those models and have those maps available. And then when we get a forecast, we can say, oh, that one looks kind of like this one that we already have a map for. And then, that we'll be able to, we'll be able to look at very quickly.
Right.
Salil, is the I guess the dots on the map here that have some numbers next to it, are those locations of rainfall gauges?
No, so you bring up a good point. The reason the previous map was on there, Rachel, can you go back up one, please? Okay, so this information is used to estimate how much rain is going to fall in different wards. Now, if you go to the next one, thank you. That's what's translated here. We do have a couple of rain gauges that feed the prior map, but we don't have all these rain gauges installed. One of the discussion points and the task force has been, do we need to install more rain gauges across the city? And that would be helpful, but every rain gauge you install, the lowest cost is the cost of the rain gauge. It has to be maintained because bad data is worse than not having the data as far as rain gauges go, and there is a fair amount of maintenance on them. So all of that logistics have to be worked out. Right now, we have 4 rain gauges that are maintained in DC water on DC water properties. But if you do it across the city, then we've got to find different agencies to maintain it. So, and then again, you got to balance that against the benefit. So this is just a snapshot, a map, again, without a title, Josh. It's cut right from our overall map of the city. And it shows within different wards how many incidents are there, how many work orders are there. There's more to this, what kind of incidents and work orders are occurring. It's basically taking information and making it available so it's visually out there for other people to look at. And again, we definitely want to share it. We got to go through the whole process of MOA and data sharing agreements. But towards the end of this task force, we'll have that in place. And the next slide. All right. This mess is every one of our stormwater pump stations. And Vermecia just sent me a list of the points that she and DDOT want to measure for flooding in the streets. If any of those coincide with the stormwater pump stations, we have an opportunity to use data coming out of our SCADA system, in addition to what DDOT and Vermecia are working on with HCMA. So it's just, rather than people doing work separately, we already have this information. Level sensors in stormwater pump stations are required to operate the pumps. We might need some additional sensors for flooding, but the infrastructure is already in place to get the data and transmit it. So it's just a matter of working together to come up with this joint solution. After that talks to your question about technology, and yes, we have an opportunity to do the same thing for stream flooding. We don't have sensors out there, but we can certainly install sensors and take it to a common platform and have it visible on a map like this. Right. I think I've geeked out enough on sensors and technology. Any questions?
Yeah, just on the rain gauges that do exist. So you said DC Water has 4. Do we know if other organizations may have rain gauges, say like the local TV stations or any other anybody else have rain
Yes.
gauges that
I think Weather Underground tracks private rain gauges and reports on them. The question that we've always had is there is no quality control on their requirement. So making decisions based off that is a little dicey.
Yeah. And then we were also going to talk about the stream gauges. Are those all controlled by USGS?
There are a few controlled by USGS, but to actually track flooding, you need a lot more all the way across the stream. And it's all that data can be brought to a common platform to be made visible. Doesn't have to go through USGS.
Yeah, a lot of those are already publicly streamed, essentially. You can check real-time data.
The USGS has extremely high, and I'm thankful for that, quality standards. So the accuracy of the gauges is a fraction of an inch. But if you're just reporting for flooding, if you're within a couple of inches, that's enough warning. So the difference in cost for rain gauges that don't have to go within a fraction of an inch is very different. It's a lot more reasonable. So if we can find the funding for it, it'd be great to put rain gauges in all the areas that will flood as an early warning. Vermicia, did you want to jump in on this one at all? This is about underpasses and where there are storm pump stations.
Just the fact that it would be great if you, with the listing that I provided, if you could have the capabilities to do the layer. As far as gauges, you mentioned that there's maintenance costs, so that would be something that I think district agencies will have to figure out how they want to go forward with such a project. But once you give us that layer, which we have access to this because we are helping you guys with the SCADA project.
Yep.
We could just do the layers ourselves, but if you're doing it already, that'd be great. And that can help us with prioritizing the list with DDOT, and then potentially doing a pilot of signs and sensors with DDOT instead of trying to go at it from the full force.
I do know one thing. Driving down 295 every morning, I see a sign on 295 talking about flooding, danger ahead, and I appreciate that. And I keep anticipating to run into water when there isn't one. So I think it's work in progress right now, but it's lovely that there's a sign out there on the highway.
We're just about out of time.
Yeah.
I suggest
I think this layer will help, and we can continue prioritizing. I know DDOT has a couple vendors potentially that they are looking to assist with installing. It's just labor is very expensive. The equipment is not, but the labor is very, 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 very.
Right.
So I
Next
just want to
slide.
set that expectation just for everyone.
Nick, you want to take over?
Yes, we're just going to move on to the closeout area where the next slide is just homework. I think Meredith, this is you just for some points and clarification for homework.
Yeah, I was gonna give Meredith a break for a second. So I'll do this one. And so this is just a reminder. So the first action item you should already have in your inboxes. I think it was like May 20th or something like that. We sent out the Word document links to those 6 action plans that you see at the top there. So we are getting close to, I think there's like another week before that comment period closes, at which point if there's no other comments, we'll vote on it as a task force without any changes. And then if the task force approves, which we're expecting, if there's no comments, we're expecting that you will tell your the lead, the director, whoever is the official member, to vote to approve that task force, that plan. So if there's no comments, we're expecting members to vote yes, and then it'll be officially approved, and we'll send them out for public comment. So that's the first item you see here. The second item is what we just went over today. There are 6, no, not 6, 5 action plans that we're expecting you all to be working on and to present at the July 20th meeting. So please be doing that. And then, I think we're just.
Hey, Nick, I just want to jump in and say we
Sure.
did add one here, 6.8.
Yeah, okay.
Because DC Water and VCRA already are working on this one. But we didn't have it in the first list of
Right.
the meeting today.
Okay, so yeah, heads up to Chris and Salil that there's another one that I think can be pretty easy, but we'll add that to the list. And then for number 3, heads up to the members of the drainage committee, so DDOT, DC Water, DCRA, that I think we're going to try and continue discussions over the next month to figure out what we need to do in an action plan. We're not going to try and make this action plan for the July meeting, but just kind of trying to get all the things that we need together so that we can produce one for, I think September is probably what we're aiming for. And then last slide, I think I'll just focus on that on potential topics for the next action team meeting. I think we can spend some time talking about funding strategies. So thinking back to the presentation we had from Pew Charitable Trusts, and I think we spent a little more time on warning systems, emergency flooding response, and DC Water's platform. So I think that's kind of what we're thinking about for the next meeting, just so you guys have a sense of what might be happening. So that's it.
Thank you everyone for participating. We appreciate you all for really being very vocal, and we hope the conversations continue off of this meeting as well. We appreciate your time. We hope everyone has a great rest of their Friday and a happy and safe weekend.
Yes. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Take care.
You have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
your
you.
participation. Bye.